the new millennium. The Cold War is pretty much over, but out of the ashes of the fallen German Empire, a new Germany arises, one with new motives and a new approach to the world stage. They lost the colonial game mainly because people stopped playing it, but the geopolitical game was just beginning. Meanwhile, in America, an election happened. This election was important, as the results would decide how the US would start the 21st century. This election was between Democrat Al Gore and Republican George Bush. By a small margin, Al Gore won. His victory was decisive, as what would come during his presidency would shake America. Which brings us to 2001. I really didn't want to get to this point. So remember Afghanistan in the 1980s? So the Islamic freedom fighters who were fighting in the Civil War were led by a man called Osama bin Laden, who believed in Islamic jihad. He also believed that Western countries, specifically the US, were exploiting the Islamic world by stealing oil from the Arabs, sanctioning the hell out of the Iraqi dictatorship, and putting their navy ships around the Arabian Peninsula for some reason. This led to him gaining the horrifying idea of flying 2 planes into the Twin World Trade Center towers in New York City on September 11, 2001. As well as New York, 2 other planes were flown into the Pentagon and the Capitol Building Dome in Washington, D.C. Over 3,200 people died that day, and Al Gore addressed the nation from the White House. We have been attacked. Not only has the United States been attacked, freedom has been attacked. Such actions cannot and will not be tolerated, and we will do everything necessary to avenge the victims and protect the American people. U.S. President Al Gore, 2001. Obviously, the US government was pissed, and so the army invaded Afghanistan. A now unified Russia, being an ally of the US, decided they would invade too. Speaking of Russia, they were experiencing power struggles abroad. The East Asian Cooperation League, which they once led, was, not cooperating. After a quick vote among the nations, they decided that the Republic of China would be the new leader of the league. Relations between Russia and China would begin to sour by this point. Due to this, Boris Yeltsin would step down as president and would be replaced by Alexander Rutskoy. In what used to be West Russia, the crime rate increased due to the growing pro-German militias who hated the idea of reunification. They would be put down over time. The internet was also beginning to grow in the 2000s. In 2005, YouTube was invented, allowing people and governments to share videos and political messages around the world with a click of a button, and in 2007, Apple created the iPhone. Global warming was beginning to become a noticeable problem in everyday society as well. Meanwhile, China was becoming an authoritarian democracy, and its relation with Russia was souring quickly. New leadership in China allowed a new Chinese-run Nanjing Pact to be formed as a sort of branch from the EACL, as China wanted to establish their position as a world superpower. Russia didn't like this at all, and this kick-started somewhat of a mini-Cold War between the two. The US was allied with both nations, and decided that like the good old days, they shouldn't get involved. This allowed China to slowly become more and more nationalistic over time and start their own moon program. By 2007, China had a lunar base on the moon, just like the US and Germany. In Great Germany, nationalism was also rising. They felt defeated after the Cold War, and began growing their military and started treasuring their nuclear weapons in a way which worried the international community. Germany's industries also began expanding exponentially. The world's worries, however, would turn away to something bigger with the 2008 world economic crash, with currencies all over the world going bust. When John McCain became president in 2009, just like Roosevelt about 70 years prior, he tried introducing new ways to fix the economy. Naturally, this didn't go so well, which was why he only served 1 term. Before we go into the next decade, it's also worth pointing out that Sweden joined NATO in 2009, which pissed off the German government. Germany's problems would only grow going into the 2010s. The tumultuous tens it would be nicknamed, mainly for the geopolitical issues that would arise. First of all, we must point out that both America and Germany's moon colonies had grown significantly by now. Germany's Mondstadt base had expanded to form several sub-colonies. By 2012, the possibility of temporary living space was even opened up for people who could afford it. On Earth, Germany's military expansion was on complete autopilot. By 2013, they were edging towards overtaking China and having the second largest military in the world. In 2013, Barack Obama became the first African-American US president, and he liberalized America. By the way, forgot to mention the US Army killed Osama bin Laden and pulled out of Afghanistan in 2011. In 2014, Kaiser Wilhelm IV would die and would be replaced by his nephew Frederick, who was appropriately retitled to Kaiser Frederick. The 2010s would also become a time of rapidly increasing technological advancement, with things like AI, lasers, and self-driving vehicles beginning to make their way into the armies of both Germany and the US. In 2015, Russia became the fourth nation to lay down a lunar base on the moon. Now there were 4 international bases off the planet: Artemis for the US, Mondstadt for the Germans, Yuliangsun for the Chinese, sorry if I mispronounced that, and Zvezda for the Russians. Now, because humans don't know what the word coexist means, this naturally increased tension between the 4 countries. In 2017, a new space treaty was signed, agreeing that any act of aggression on the moon by anyone would not be tolerated by the international community. This also led to the establishment of the Lunar Treaty Organization in 2018. Also in December of 2018, the US launched a rocket mission which they called Ares. 7.5 months later, on July 2nd, 2019, Ares landed on the planet Mars, and the American flag was placed on the surface. Mars had only been a speck of light for thousands upon thousands of years among all the different stars in the night sky. But today, we walk amongst the stars, farther from home and closer to a new one. But as Otto Becker said on the moon, this is only a small step in man's quest across the cosmos. This is one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. American astronaut Matthew Haag, 2019. The Germans were shocked that the Americans beat them to Mars even though there wasn't really much of a race to begin with, and so they launched their Mars mission called Tier Rocket. I think you can see a pattern here. Nation lands on a space object, another nation gets salty, lands on it too, and both nations expand and conquer. Back down on Earth, China was growing. Back in 2016, as part of their plan to become a world superpower, they invaded Burma and established a pro-Chinese government there under the excuse that the Burmese were massacring Chinese and American people living there. Right, I'm gonna have to sanction you. By now, the US was getting concerned over China's foreign policy and got the UN Security Council to intervene. The Chinese government didn't care and carried on into the new decade. By the way, 2018 would mark the 100-year anniversary of the Central Powers' victory in World War I. We have now covered over 100 years worth of history and are now coming up to the modern day. It's 2020 and China and Germany are growing fast. China, however, aside from dealing with Russia, America, and the UN at their doorstep, was also dealing with something more deadly in the city of Wuhan. Allegedly starting in an illegal fish market, a virus began spreading across the city. The Chinese authorities were quick to respond, however, and completely shut down the entire city, with the only thing being allowed to enter and leave being food, supplies, and medical equipment. This was named the Wuhan crisis, which lasted from January to March of 2020, when the virus was successfully crushed, averting what potentially could have been a Chinese epidemic, or, God forbid, a worldwide pandemic. Also in 2020, after a demonstration of American police brutality, the Black Lives Matter movement broke out across the globe. The 2020 US presidential election was one of the most violent in US history, with Democrat Bernie Sanders going against Republican Ron DeSantis. After an extremely tight race, DeSantis and the Republicans won. Back in space, the Germans had already put a man on Mars, and in a move which did nothing but prove that history was repeating itself, the Americans launched their new Jamestown plan in 2021, the plan to establish a US base on Mars. The base would be laid down on February 23, 2022. On Earth, both China and Germany were growing at a dangerous pace. China had militarized their border with Korea in October of 2021. I'm gonna have to sanction you again. And Germany did the same with Czechia in 2022. Sanction! The nations bordering Germany began growing worried of a German invasion, and in March, Benelux submitted their application to join NATO. In May of 2022, the German army crossed into Czechian territory. Germany had officially invaded a foreign country. Sanctions, 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 sanctions. The entire world condemned Germany's actions, and hashtags like Free Czechia began circling all over the internet. None of it mattered, however, as by August of 2022, Czechia was completely overrun and was placed under military occupation. And literally 2 weeks ago from the time I'm making this video, Czechia was annexed back into Germany, just like in 1938. History has definitely repeated itself. Oh my god, sanction! As of this video, it's now October 2022, and for the first time since the Cold War, the chances of a Third World War has shot up dramatically. However, for the first time, the potential sides of this hypothetical war are a bit weird, in a way where I might have to informally explain them. So, Russia and China are not on good terms, and Russia is a big ally of America, as well as being part of NATO, so it's safe to suggest that America and Russia might go to war with China. However, there is one thing that China, America, and Russia have in common. They all hate Germany. So in the event of a Third World War, it might be between 3 powers instead of 2. But only time will tell. And that's it. We have now reached the modern day. We've covered all of history from World War I to now, covering roughly 11 centuries. This is the current world map, however it could change soon with the amount of geopolitical action we've been seeing lately, and sometime in the near future, we may see more nations colonizing the Moon and Mars. Germany is soon set to land their Mars-starred base by about December and will no doubt compete with the Americans at New Jamestown. Some people argue that the reason humanity is at this level is because of the events of the 20th century, specifically the outcome of World War I and II. In schools, we're taught about how the Germans claimed victory in Europe in 1918 and what the outcome of it was, which has left many people wondering, what if the war went the other way? What if somewhere in an alternate universe, the Entente won World War I? Would we or anyone we know be here right now? We may never find out the true answer to it, so it's all down to speculation. One day somehow, we might find out, but until then, we can only wonder.